Hi, everyone. This is the Kundalini Collective podcast number 15. And today we have Lawrence Edwards. Lawrence Edwards is one could call a Kundalini and spiritual awakening expert and author. He's written books, including Awakening Kundalini and The Soul Journey. I'm sure many people have read Awakening Kundalini. He's also one of the co-founders of the Kundalini Research Network in the 90s with Bonnie and Yvonne Cason. And he's a Kundalini counselor, teacher, and very respected in the community. So we're very lucky to have him today. And if there's anything more you want to say concerning yourself, Lawrence, please start and tell us a little bit about your journey, your awakening journey, and how you got here today.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me, Samir, and great to be with you all. And I really fully support the wonderful work that you're doing to help people be informed about such a mysterious and often challenging process. So the work that you're doing is really magnificent in that way. Slight correction, I wasn't one of the founders of the Kundalini Research Network. I joined that in 1998. It was already formed. But soon after became the president and chair, served that way for many years. But that was already way into the process of the unfolding of Kundalini for me, and felt like a graceful next step in being called to share what I've been given over the years, because my experiences, well, they literally started when I was a small child. And some of my earliest memories, my mother and father used to tell me about, me talking about, was this presence, this divine feminine presence, what I called as a 3-year-old, the Lady of Light, who stood over my bed and just showered her presence and radiance and grace on me. And whereas the adults in my life were going, no, that was just a dream. It was so real, so palpable, that I was not going to be dissuaded from that, and really felt that as a guiding force until when I started practicing yoga and started having more, explicit experiences of yogic processes and got involved in Hatha yoga and early in my university career, and that same Lady of Light returned. And I had another vision of her standing on my bed. Only now I was, 19 years old. And so that living presence of the divine, and in the yogic system that we would call Shakti Kundalini, this divine power of the infinite, to reveal the truth of who we are. It's the power of revelation and transformation. It reveals the infinitude of being, all beings, not just ours. There really is only one being, and we're all facets of it. But to come home to that, to know that, to experience that directly, to then live a life informed by that, is really what the whole process of transformation and awakening that the Kundalini paradigm is talking about. And it talks about it quite lucidly, but it's not the only paradigm talking about it. In any spiritual tradition you look at into the depths of the experiences of mystics, you'll see this transcendent power moving through them. They might call it Holy Spirit. They might call it Shekinah. They might call it just consciousness. Many different names, just one power. The power of consciousness to know itself as the infinite, that's all-inclusive, that leads to the experience of we're all one. And with that, the transformation of then what are we doing in this life and in this world? And that's been my experience of what that power has drawn me into in terms of profound meditative states, and dissolving the boundaries between what we would think of as a separate state called meditation and the ordinary states of waking, dream, and deep sleep state. For the ordinary mind, the waking, dream, and deep sleep states are all it ever gets to know. It gets to visit 3 states, and that's it. But there's a 4th, all-inclusive state, and that is the state of meditation, and it subsumes the 3 states, and when we access it, it transforms our experience through those ordinary states as well. All this is what has been written about for thousands of years about the deep and profound transformation wrought by Kundalini.
Thanks, Lawrence. I think from the collective's perspective in our Kundalini collective, what we find is a lot of people come to us with challenges that are presented from spontaneous awakenings. So from your research, your life experience, yourself as a counselor, what kind of things do you help? So what kind of things do you think will help people who are going through challenging times post a spiritual Kundalini awakening?
Right. Well, one of the most important things is having support, and that the work that you're doing that is so important, because people are with awakening of Kundalini. It's the power of consciousness, but to the ordinary mind, it feels alien. It feels separate. It feels different. And so the ordinary mind, who thought, well, I'm the only one home here and I'm in charge of this mind and body vehicle, and suddenly other things are happening, thoughts, feelings, memories, transcendent experiences, energies moving through the body. The ego mind is going, wait a minute, what is this? How do I deal with this? How do I integrate this? How do I get rid of it? How do I stop it? I mean, all these things are the sort of the natural questions that come up for people who don't have a framework, a context. Originally, these processes were meant to be awakened and unfolded in a yogic, meditative, some kind of spiritual container. Because it happens to Buddhist practitioners, I have Buddhist monks who get in touch with me, it happens to Zen practitioners, it happens to nuns, it can happen to priests. But they have a context that also helps to hold it, and people in everyday life don't necessarily have that at all. So having a support is one. Having an understanding of, wait a minute, where does this fit in? Because now the whole inner landscape of what I thought I was here on this planet doing is being altered by this awakening and unfolding power of consciousness that is transforming so much of my internal experience, my experience of the world, etc. So coming to understand what's the intent of this process, because the first thing the ego mind goes into, it feels threatened. And so it can feel fearful and angry. Well, fear and anger as emotions, first of all, just on an ordinary level, we know that fear and anger create a condition in the brain. Part of my background is in neurophysiology, called amygdala hijack. These are two very powerful emotions. They generate kind of this distorted view and literally shift what goes on in the brain to lower brain centers that are all involved with fight, flight, freeze. That response. So what's often most disruptive to the Kundalini process, well, fear and anger. Fear and anger, because they create such static in the system. Here's an energy trying to gracefully open things, lovingly do things, wants to give the gift of knowing you are the divine. There is no greater gift. But if the ego mind's going, wait a minute, no, I'm in pain here, I've got this going on, then it gets into the fear, the anger. It exacerbates symptoms, because that's what fear and anger do, even in ordinary life. They make things worse. And so now it's got to get that calmed down. Well, some of that can be calmed down if we start to understand, what's this process about? What's the purification? When we talk about purification, what does that mean in terms of how the body gets purified? There are things that can come up and happen physiologically in the body that's part of it. Then there's all the purification that happens on a mental level, or what the yogis we would call the subtle body level. And then there's even a deeper, more profound level of shift and purification that happens that has to do with the causal body, what in the yogic tradition is mapped out as the deep sleep state. So these movements, these spontaneous movements of the energy of awakened consciousness can create changes on all these different levels: physical, right, emotional, mental, and even at the very root of what causes it all. So when people are going through that, and when I did my doctoral research back in 1986 on Kundalini and the processes it engendered in people who had been going through Kundalini unfolding for 10 years or more. So I was studying long-term practitioners to see what those kinds of changes were. And I was looking at three classes of individuals: people who lived everyday lives as what would be called householder sadhana, living in the world, doing their practices; people who were family members or had families but were living in an ashram, so they had this context for holding that. And then the third group was a group of swamis, people who were renunciates, totally dedicated to yoga and service. And one of the great things was it was uniform across all those three groups. The profound changes were very similar. So it didn't mean, oh, I have to be in an ashram, I have to become a monk. No, the householders were doing it equally. So that to me was also a validation of what the ancient yogic tradition and Vedic tradition says. This age is the age for householder sadhana because it integrates it into the world. We have to bring this consciousness into the world. So understanding both the context and how these purificatory processes unfold, and having somebody who can help contextualize it, normalize it, because the automatic response of the fear-driven mind clouds the vision, impedes the process. So that kind of understanding and a supportive group and a supportive teacher is really important for being able to have a container that gives a sense of, oh, I'm not in this alone, and one can move through this safely.
Thanks, Lawrence. So I was just thinking that in the traditional model, you would need to be in an ashram, you would need to be studying for many years for these experiences to happen. Why do you think these experiences seem to be being triggered spontaneously? What do you think maybe? The appearances is happening more often. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's just we communicate better through the internet. But what are your thoughts of why these experiences are happening outside the traditional model?
Right. Well, I think the traditional model was, you think of planting a seedling in a greenhouse. The greenhouse is the perfect environment for doing that and protecting it and helping it through its fragile stages of growth. And it eventually has to be planted out and hardened off in order to make it in the environment. So that kind of contained place for doing practice, well, that's been used in various ways. I mean, monasteries, Christian monasteries, various traditions have their way of holding that. But it's also looked at as across lifetimes. So the Eastern traditions especially will talk about, well, we're on an evolutionary path that goes across lifetimes. And the advances we've made, the purifications we've done, the practices we've done, the good karmas we've created in that sense, will go with us into future lives. So really the Eastern traditions looked at that awakening of Kundalini was happening at a particular point in the cycle of the evolution of the soul across lifetimes, when it got into a place where it was ripe. That ripening process is enhanced by doing conscious practice, being engaged, looking beyond the ordinary mind. But you might come into a new life not aware of what you've done in past lives, but you have a consciousness, you have a readiness for awakening, you have a ripeness that then gives the appearance of, oh, that came out of nowhere. Well, from the Eastern traditions, really, I mean, this is my experience in meditative states, in the states of where we can see beyond the veil of just this one life and this ordinary consciousness. We can see that both for ourselves and sometimes for others, how that has built to this moment. So the spontaneous awakening is always the result of lifetimes of dedicated practice And though it appears to come out of nowhere now, it's the fruit of the good work that each soul has done in prior incarnations to cultivate that ripeness, that readiness to become fully awake, fully aware, and live it into this world.
Thank you. Moving on from that, do you think there are certain triggers that might be the cause, whether it be societal conditioning or inner trauma? Do you think there are triggers, perhaps?
Well, yes. I mean, and the consciousness, the power of consciousness, that we would call Shakti, right? That power is boundless, and its ability to awaken us is unimpeded. There's a technical term in the Shaivite tradition where it's called Swatantriya Shakti. It means the power of unimpeded power of consciousness. That awakening can happen anytime, but it often is sort of set in motion in the moment when something pushes us out of our ordinary confines of, I'm this person. I'm certain I'm a man. I'm sitting here. Each one of us has our own way of carrying in completely unconscious manner that certainty of who I am on a physical bodily level. Something comes along. It might be trauma. I lived not far from New York City, and after 9/11, there were people who, in the devastation of the World Trade Center here, had awakened experiences due to that total shift that happened in the face of that kind of gross and communal kind of trauma. Well, the same thing happens for individuals, but it can happen as in a brief moment of a dream. It can happen in standing, in an awesome environment and looking out at the sea and the ocean and the waves, and suddenly you're out of your ordinary limited eye awareness. It can be standing on a hilltop and feeling the cosmos. It can be laying on the ground at night and seeing the stars. So many things that sort of shift us out of the confines that we're usually locked into of who I am and the certainty of that. Even if it's fraught with fears and angers and this and that, there's a sort of solidity to it. Something comes along and pushes us out of it. It's like, oh, the shades got drawn and this thing comes in. But the instrument may not be ready to, how do I process that? And that's when the fears, the reactivity, the misunderstandings, the desperate pursuit for trying to understand and running into bad sources of information, and that further traumatizes people, because I see that as well. So yes, any number of things can trigger it. Birth can trigger it. If you're so ripe, the very trauma of birth, there's people who come in and they have awakened experiences that happened through the birth canal and coming into their, being a neonate. So it's anytime, any place it can happen. It can happen on your deathbed.
Looking at some of the models that you find interesting that might be mapping, let's say, the awakening process. I know that you know quite a bit about Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey, the monolith. Would you like to talk a little bit about about what it is, how it works, and how it might be relevant to anyone going through any kind of spiritual awakening journey?
Oh, sure. And, it's something I discovered more or less as I was processing a lot of my own experiences and fitting it into what I was studying at the time as psychology, Western psychology, Jungian psychology, archetypal, mythological works, because our great myths. The word myth doesn't mean untrue. A myth is something that encodes a deeper truth. And so the mythological, what Joseph Campbell called the monomyth, the one myth of the hero's journey, is a summation of when you look across many different traditions that talk about evolution, talk about what happens, whether it was Moses, whether it was Christ, whether it was Buddha, whether it was each and every one of us, because each and every one of us is on that journey. We can start to discern and make use of the insights that he made available through studying, thousands of different myths. And so the hero's journey is one that fits very well with spiritual awakening unfolding across traditions. And the basic stages of it are, first of all, the hero or heroine is leading an ordinary life. Then something comes along and is going to shift them out of that. That might be a choice. One can choose to go on the hero's journey, or it might feel more like an abduction. It might feel like, oh, something spontaneously came about that just threw me out of my ordinary life. Either way, what's happening is the dynamic of I have to leave behind being completely embedded and identified with ordinary culture and all that it does to define reality. Because ultimately on a hero's journey, and we're talking about the spiritual level of hero's journey, hero's journey can also be looked at in terms of peak performance and athletes and people trying to win gold medals and stuff. It's applicable there, but there the goals are very concrete. On the spiritual journey, the goal is the boundless wisdom of knowing the infinitude of your own being and the being of all. So it was considered the great hero's journey. But we have to first leave behind the ordinary mind and its enculturated framework that binds us. Then we go on this, we're brought into what's a mythic journey. It's and along the way, we're going to encounter challenges. We're going to have to try and reach inside for resources and virtues and strengths we didn't know we have. We have to have outer allies that also seem to come from mythic realms or hold sort of mythic understanding to support us on that journey. And then those tests are going to go along the way. And part of it is going to be determined by, well, where are we? Where is our hero's journey taking us? But it's going to take us beyond the mind. So on the spiritual hero's journey, we're confronting the inner obstacles, the very nature of mind, the very nature of consciousness identified with a mind and body. And so when we think of Kundalini as the innate power of our own infinite self, that when activated is trying to help shift us from being so wedded to, I'm just a man, I'm just a woman, I'm the roles I play, I'm a husband, I'm a wife, I'm a son, I'm a daughter, I'm a this, I'm a that. All the things that contain and hold our consciousness as a limited I awareness, they're all going to be challenged. Not that they have to be erased. The problem isn't their existence. Their problem is our soul identification with them. So my mind still knows this is a body, this is a man, this is a that. But moment by moment, it's also informed by that higher consciousness. This is what's symbolized by the awakening of the third eye. The one eye. Think about it. That's a symbol, one eye. The two eyes, they see, ordinary reality is always divisive. It's always separate. It's always polarized. It's this or it's that. It's not this, it's not that. That's the ordinary vision, and that informs this level of reality. Very important to have that. But it's uninformed until the third eye, symbolically speaking, now begins to infuse it with unity vision. Remember, the goal is to see everything as one as well as the difference. It's not an either or, it's both and. And so the hero's journey goes through this process of ways in which we're sort of taken out of the ordinary realms of our everyday culture and ordinary mind. And then we go on this mythic journey where we're going to encounter obstacles. The obstacles are our own life. We don't have to go seeking them. We don't need special ones made up for us. They're going to be the crucible is the divine space in which we live. There's nothing more divine than where you are. You're in the exact place to do that work and realize the fullness of your divine self. And everything in that environment is going to support that when we see it that way. When there's a shift in our attention, our perspective, our way of looking at even our own life, as well as the lives and the unfolding of what's going on in the everyday world. Until we get to that place where we're really in that. And that's a long process. That's a process that the yogis would talk, even with Kundalini awakening, could take several lifetimes. So it's, again, not a one lifetime model. That evolution is going to unfold by that inner power of consciousness, regardless of how impatient the ordinary mind might be, and its impatience can actually get in the way. It's going to unfold. What we can do is to say, how do we facilitate that? How do we come into harmony with that? That's why sort of the Shakti sadhana, the sadhana of being aligned with this power of consciousness, is to be aligned in our practices, our thoughts, our ways of acting and working in the world, our contemplations, that they all support that. Because we can be angry and annoyed and wish it was going away, and then go indulge in old patterns that we thought were going to bring us pleasure in the past. And suddenly they're just toxic to us. That football game I always loved to watch, boy, now it just doesn't make any sense. My consciousness doesn't want to sit in front of that telly and look at that, or whatever it might be. So there are these changes that are being wrought, and there's another thing that feels a friction between the ego mind's attachment to its past ways and the unfolding of whole new ways of being and seeing and living into the world. Ultimately, the hero's journey wasn't meant to then just deposit one in this wonderful state of unity consciousness, and you sit under a tree and eventually your body falls over and dies and it's all gone. There were yogis who did that, literally. They didn't want to come back. They chose not to come back. It's one of the wonderful aspects of the great story of Buddha. That was Buddha's attainment. He sat under the Bodhi tree, said, I'm going to sit here until I know how to get free of suffering. Shakti, and his process fits right into the Kundalini paradigm. He attains this state of absolute freedom, pure consciousness, sees that, brings it back to the body so that he awakens, gets up and walks away, and then stands there and looking back at where he awakened. He looks at the Bodhi tree, and a despair comes over him as he realizes, I can't just give this away. Each person's going to have to go through this to find it themselves. It's here. I can testify to that. But he was ready to give up. And it said that at the time, all the great devas and devis came and, implored him to teach away. Yes, you can't just give this state to another person, but you can teach a way for people to unfold it and discover from the self. That's Buddha Dharma. That's Yoga Dharma. That's Kundalini Dharma. So in the paradigm of the hero's journey isn't complete without the return. That you are given the gifts of grace. You're given the gifts of wisdom. You're given the gifts of insights, of practices. Bring them back and pass them on. They're there for the good of all beings. All beings are your being. There is only one. There is no other. And so if one were to leave others in suffering, you're actually leaving parts of your own self in suffering. So the great beings said, no, I have to keep coming back. I'm going to keep, that's the Bodhisattva way in the Buddhist tradition, but I'll keep coming back to try and pass this on, to serve in a way that all will be free.
Thank you. I'm quite interested in monomyth because as a filmmaker, I did a master's in filmmaking. Part of my thesis was looking at the monomyth in Hollywood.
Joseph Campbell was a consultant on Star Wars. He was the one who brought in that deep, profound archetypal understanding that pervades Lucas's work.
So one of the feelings that I got from my experience is that we are infusing culture with myth. So we might consciously think there's a film we're watching, but subconsciously we are identifying with these archetypal characters. I'm wondering whether culture has brought into itself these archetypal characters, and we are subconsciously being drawn to them because we understand there's some truth to it, and maybe on some lower level, subtle level, it is affecting people. So we might grow up thinking, oh, these are just stories, but actually we're being told about ideas. Do you think that there might be, actually awakening people subtly through culture, whether it's story, myth, music, film? Do you have any thoughts about this?
Oh yeah, and it was one of the things that concerned Jung, especially as things were developing in Europe in the 30s, and he was very concerned about what mythic figures were being invoked in people's dreams that he was seeing, because these archetypal forms, they're part of what Jung talked about as the collective unconscious. They're something that every one of us has, but which ones we actualize, which ones the energy of which we tap into, well, that's going to vary upon our conditioning, what we're drawn to, our religious things, and so much, unfortunately, has been driven by power, and the power archetypes of domination, exploitation, control, and the mythic figures that can go with that. And yes, they're then mythologically presented in a movie like Darth Vader. It symbolizes that. And that's very different than what Luke Skywalker, trying to be attuned to the Force. Not an ego-driven, just my way, and I want to seize power to further amplify my egoic nature. I want to be attuned to the higher power and see what's the unfolding of grace. That's spirituality. That's not an ego-driven culture, but we are driven by those aspects, and the hero's journey can be reduced to that in terms of you can look at the hero's journey and see that what you're trying to attain is the pinnacle of oligarchyhood, and what are you going to amass, and you can self-aggrandize what you're doing and exploiting to do that. That's a very different view of the hero's journey and what its goal is than what it is to aspire to relieve the suffering of all beings and promote the flourishing of all beings through cooperation. That's a whole other myth that can still be applied. But I think that's the one we have to evolve to, because that's the one that's going to save humanity. If we have this myth ongoing of individualism, polarity, domination, exploitation, control, we see where it's going. It's destroying the earth. It's destroying species. It's destroying everything. So the inherent consciousness, this unity consciousness that we can talk about as Kundalini, as Holy Spirit, as Shekinah, as Chogyam, whatever words we want to use, it's also drawing, saying, no, there's a different evolutionary path we can take that leads to a higher level of group existence, everyone in being informed, everyone caring for each other. That's a very different pattern then.
Thank you. Earlier on, this relates to what you've just been saying, but earlier on you talk about how people would awaken in an ashram, but also that people who are going through the process at home, so to speak, that they made the equal progress, and that we are now in a time, in a way, of people awakening within society. I mean, I know you've been touching upon this already, but in relating that to the hero's journey, and as I understand the hero's journey, that the hero finds the gift, and then the hero brings the gift back to their world. Now, you've touched upon this already, but do you expand a bit more about what you think the gift may be now at this point of time. So,
Right.
so say for people going through the Kundalini spiritual awakening process, what could be the gift that they could bring back and make a difference to the wider world? Do you want to expand on that, perhaps?
Oh, yeah. It's living from a place of loving compassion. It's living that into the world. What's called on right now is to live love, compassion, the vision, the equality vision that is that unitary vision, seeing through the eye of wisdom, is to see there's no other. I can't harm another because I'm harming myself. I can't harm the planet, so I'm harming myself. It's that level of wisdom. It's not a concrete thing. It's not like I've got the answer and I've got the vision that explains all of it. No. It's so humble. It's so real. It's so, how do I treat this person on the road when I've got to get to an appointment? How do I treat the person who's checking me out at the checkout counter? How do I treat loved ones, enemies? How do I dissolve otherness? Because that's what the shift in vision is about. Unity consciousness means, oh, it's all me. And to see through the eyes of the divine, the great Christian mystic, St. John of the Cross, spoke and wrote a poem saying, once he was given the grace to see through God's eyes, and he said, all God sees is himself. All God sees is himself. He then laments, why didn't my church teach me this? Religion has been used for divisiveness when what's sacred is oneness. What's sacredness is this profound, informed wisdom of, everyone is lovable. Everyone is loved. Everyone deserves loving, compassionate, kind treatment. That's the gift. How we then walk that into the halls of power. How do we bring cultural institutions into alignment with that? Well, that will evolve as more and more people say, no, we need to say, this is, how do we take care of everybody? How do we take care of everyone? If somebody's amassing huge amounts of wealth and possessions, that means there's others who don't have. That's not okay. There needs to be a shift.
And how do we help affect that shift?
More and more people awake. I mean, it's our individual power that we then have to. And I mean, I've seen very often people wake up and they just go, "Oh, this culture is a nightmare," and they just want to walk away. I get that. That was Buddha wanting to walk away from the Bodhi tree, go sit in a cave, give up his body, and dissolve in bliss. But there's people suffering, and so we want to say, how do I do the work now of transforming our governmental structures, our societal structures? That'll be a long work. It's not going to be fast. It's going to be generations and generations and generations of more and more people becoming more and more awake, more and more saying, no, this is what's valuable. I want our actions as a collective to reflect what's most valuable. Right now, as a collective, our actions reflect collective ignorance. We have to shift that, but that's going to take collective awakening. That's part of what's happening at this stage in history.
Do we need to have a more global perspective on the awakening process? Could there be a more global perspective of what's going on, a more collective, and one that incorporates many traditions, shamanistic, Indian, as well as Western or Hermetic or Sufi practices? So, yeah, a lot of that question.
Well, it was one of the reasons why I really used in The Soul's Journey, my book, The Soul's Journey, the framework is the hero's journey, because that as a monomyth crosses all cultures and all spiritual traditions. So I was really trying to show how, a classic Kundalini process can be understood in that, but our individual experiences may not be classic Kundalini archetypal imagery at all. They may be completely unique to us or unique to sort of the patterns of of conditioning our own minds have gone through in the West. So I don't think it's anything, it needs to be at all singular, or that the Buddhist or yogic or Hindu tradition had any lock on that. It's across cultures, and that's something I'm clear. I'm better informed about those traditions because those are traditions I studied more deeply in. But absolutely, I mean, Jung wrote a lot about the Hermetic and alchemical tradition, and looked at that as a paradigm for understanding the changes in consciousness, because alchemy was all about that transformation of consciousness. And so he used that as a perspective, that we can find it in Christian mystics, that we can find it in the Kabbalah. Absolutely, we can find it in the Native American spirit traditions. I remember I had the good fortune to be talking with a Native American Sioux chief who had read The Soul's Journey, and we got into a discussion. He goes, "This is our tradition too. This is what we call grandmother spirit. All the dynamics you talk. We had the most marvelous discussion about it, and that being able to do the cross talk and translate back and forth was so fluid and just so delightful. That's part of the gift of this time of communication, that we're not just, to make it out of the village is a big deal, much less to make it out of your culture. Now we cross-pollinate everything. And so absolutely, we want to see it and see through the eyes of recognizing that this infinite power of consciousness, the power of revelation, it makes use of every tradition. It wants to reveal itself. It's like that's part of its intent. And whether it does it through being clothed in a Sufi garb, a Jewish garb, a Christian garb, it doesn't matter. It wants the highest to be known. And that's why that highest vision of unity, of oneness, of the boundlessness of love and rapture that's in that state. When we talk about the state, then all the differences of the traditions that only exist on the pathway up, the top. There's only one top. There's one peak. That's it. And then you're in unity. Now we're seeing through the one eye. Now we see, oh, yes. Oh, and it took the form of that. Oh, she took the form of the trees. She took the form of the sky. She took the form of the stream. It's everything. This is how ecstatic that expansion and creation is.
So, I know you emailed us this question, which is about the word Kundalini with regards to our own group, Kundalini Collective.
Right.
And is it too narrow an approach? And looking back at the 90s when you were all going through your experiences, do you think Kundalini was looking back retrospectively, was Kundalini the right word to use? Or was there a bigger thing happening?
No, it's both. Bigger things are happening, but the best map we were working with at the time was the Kundalini map, and it was the map that most people had some knowledge of, had some familiarity. People were already starting to do, hatha yoga in their local YMCAs and this and that. They were hearing about things. So it was a part of the time of what was emerging there and what was being brought into the West, whether it was through Yogananda, whether it was through Muktana, whoever the teachers were also bringing that in. And it was capturing the zeitgeist of the time, and it was capturing people's understanding and was engaging. Many times it was misinterpreted, or sort of, people hammered the paradigm into their context, but it served. But it shouldn't limit. And Shakti's like, wait, that's just one way, one facet of the infinite faces of the divine. And so if it serves, great. If it doesn't, there's another one here that serves. Let's serve through that one. So I have no attachment to that as there's one way, the only way, this or that. That kind of fundamentalism and concrete thinking is just a reflection of a stage of where the mind gets caught and gets wedded and identified. We're talking about getting free of a mind that's solely identified and caught and contracted.
What would you see? Are you beginning to see a meta map? A map that wraps all over? I know that monomyth could be one of them, but are you beginning to see something bigger happening? Because the Hindu mystics of the tantrics, the Buddhists, didn't necessarily say you could have spontaneous awakenings?
Well, no, but again, sort of yes and no. I find too many adepts. I traveled around India. I lived in India. I was trained as a sannyasin in India myself, and saw all these people who, to me, they got caught in their own sense of orthodoxy. It can't be this unless it's that, and so they're dismissive. They think they have the paradigm, and if it isn't in there, then that's not Shakti. And to me, my experience of Shakti is she knows no bounds. And that's her nature. And the spontaneous awakenings happen all the time. Happened in the ashram in India, happened with people in India coming to the ashram looking for help that I would see in a clinic there. And so I think the problem is more people's being wedded to these restrictive understandings and fundamentalism around Kundalini. I mean, fundamentalism isn't something that just goes with Christians or Muslims or whatever. Well, there are fundamentalist yogis. There are fundamentalist Hindus. There are fundamentalist tantrics. And that's not the nature of Shakti. The nature of Shakti is to dissolve boundaries, to create infinite expansion, to see the unity of all that. How are you going to put that in a little package? Well, that may suit that person's little mind, but that's not Shakti. That's not my experience of Shakti. So I've never spoken about it like that.
I'm going to ask a question. So I guess it's related, but it's around, in a way, it's connected to love, and it's around where does the key lie? In a way, does the key lie within the heart or within the head, or both? Have you any thoughts on that?
Well, you see, that's a mind that differentiates heart and head. That's not Shakti. So when you talk about a key, are you talking about your mind's projection of what a key would be, should be, could be? Or isn't every moment the key? This is the essence of Tantra. Every moment is a leaping off point into the infinite. Every moment. Every moment. It has to do with our attention, our awareness. And what's the aperture? If we walk around looking through a tiny aperture, everything is rather reduced. Shakti wants to say, everything. Everything. Good, bad, ugly, doesn't matter. Everything is a leaping off point into the infinite. That's why in the Vijnana Bhairava, great text from the Kashmir Shaivite tradition that talks about, 112 particular techniques for doing that. It includes everything from a sneeze, right? You sneeze, it stops the mind for a minute. The mind goes blank for a moment. In that moment, there's like a delight that arises. We don't sustain it. We say, God bless you. That's an interesting thing. Why do we say that? But the shift that happens because of the quietness of the mind, there's a bliss. There's a little taste of joy. Because remember, your infinite nature is rapturous joy, boundless love, infinite compassion. Anytime that's accessible. In a sneeze, you stop. It just arises. Matter of fact, if you go and don't get the sneeze, you feel a little ripped off. Oh, I didn't get the delight that comes because my mind stopped in the sneeze. And then just the flashing forth, that flashing forth of one's infinite nature is accessible anytime, right here, right now.
I'll try another one then. Where would you place the importance and role of love in the process?
Love is the beginning and the end, and suffuses everything in between. See, the ordinary mind is divisive. It was made to be that, so we don't criticize. It's not a criticism. Mind is an atomistic. It atomizes. It makes things broken up. Think of the mind like a prism. right? That diffracts light. You put white light in one side and out comes a rainbow. It differentiates it. All those colors were in the white light, but the mind is a prism. So unity consciousness goes in from source and then gets projected out as all these different things. That's what the mind does. Now, the same thing the mind does, it goes, oh, well, there must be, love, bliss, consciousness. We think of those classic terms used to attempt to describe the infinite. Buddha talked about the four immeasurables: boundless loving compassion, boundless rapturous joy, boundless wisdom, boundless unshakable equanimity. The yogis talked about it as Sat Chit Ananda, Sat, pure, eternal consciousness of being. Chit is that consciousness, it is consciousness itself. Ananda is the rapturous joy. And that loving quality isn't separate. So these are all present. Consciousness is all of those simultaneously. The mind has to say 3, 4, 5 different terms to talk about the one. The one is inseparable from boundless love, in the same way that the light and the heat of fire are inseparable. We can call one light, we can call one heat, but the reality is those are not separate things in a fire. Consciousness, this awakened consciousness, is suffused. Its very nature is boundless love. It's transforming our entire physical and subtle bodies through a loving, compassionate process. May not feel that way to the ego mind as it's being forced to confront attachments and limitations of ideas and things that the body has to be healed from. But that's the motive force behind it all, is the love of the infinite for the finite.
Thank you, Lawrence. I'll just throw in a thought I've had about this, and it's probably a silly thought, but I thought for many years that if you have imagine the 4 dimension, it's like a one big light, and it comes to the 3rd dimension, and it hits a big diamond. It gets broken up into loads of little bits. Then love is the energy that brings those bits back together again.
Love is the bits themselves. Love is what created the diamond.
Samir, any thoughts?
I do, but I'm gonna digress slightly, because we've been touching upon Jung a little bit during this conversation, and I know, Lawrence, that you are again pretty well versed in Jungian psychology. So, could you tell us about how you relate? Firstly, what's great about Jungian psychology in itself, and then how can it relate to spiritual awakening, and how has it helped you?
Right. Thank you. Love what you did with that. You'll see that in many yantras and tankas in the Buddhist and Indian tradition have their maps with these archetypal figures. So people, even when I was doing more Jungian work with people, and those things would come up uniquely for them, would say, draw it, map it out. What image? Or if you not good at drawing, okay, where can you cut out a picture? Can you find some? But to help, our psyche often projects things in order to encounter them. It's part of what Jung noticed. Freud noticed it as well, that we project in order to be able to confront what's internal, but we're not accessing the internal. We project it outside. Now we have to come face to face with it. That can be negatives and positives. The archetypal realm, what was particularly helpful to me about Jung and why I felt so drawn to it was, this was also, back in the late 60s and early 1970s when I started studying psychology. Humanistic psychology was evolving into what was known as transpersonal psychology. And transpersonal psychology was an attempt to incorporate the understanding and the meaning of transcendent experiences. that Maslow's work in humanistic psychology that had to do with peak experiences and that would happen was set the stage for being able to understand, oh, well, what are those peak experiences revealing about our psychology? And many transpersonalists were looking around, and they turned to the Eastern paradigms because the psychology of yoga is a transpersonal psychology. The psychology of the Buddhist tradition is a transpersonal psychology. It transcends the personal, the individual. Jung's psychology is transpersonal. He wouldn't use that term, he wasn't around then, but many transpersonalists were drawn to Jung's work because the very nature of archetypes is they're transcendent. They're not just uniquely individual. They have a unique expression through me or you or somebody else, but the images and the things that Jung coined the term the collective unconscious as this reservoir of human experience across millions of years has these archetypal forms that carry the energy of those ways of being, knowing, interacting, experiencing the world. And so with a transpersonal psychology, we start to see that, well, those are the images that are informing us in our dreams. They're the images that are present in our religious systems that inform us on deeply and profoundly meaningful ways that way. They inform our unconscious interactions with people when we encounter an authority. Well, we're right there. Suddenly, it's not just that person as an authority. Well, there might be our mom and dad is wrapped up in that projection. It might be a mythic image of an authority. The person has a robe on. Now there's that. Why do people wear a robe? Oh, because a robe is a uniform. What is uniform? One form. Uniform. One form. It's meant to reduce the individuality to just the uniform. Now, the archetype of whatever that uniform is supposed to represent should come through more clearly. If it's a police, it's power. If it's a priest, it's supposed to be sacred power. You see how these things operate. We're not conscious of this, but this is the world we're walking around through, all these projections. So Jung was helpful in saying, well, we need to be conscious of this because otherwise we're just living out, bouncing around off all these unconscious influences arising internally, provoked externally, and we're going to make a mess of this. And we are.
So how would you say that archetypes can help?
Well, to understand the difference between, for instance, the Kundalini, let's stay with one system, but no, let's go across systems. The Divine Mother, the Sacred Mother. Oh, she's in everything. You can't look at a religious system that didn't have the Sacred Mother. She was ousted, she was diminished. The Christian and the patriarchal dominated Middle Eastern traditions really diminished her, but she kept coming back. She's the goddess. She's not going to be excluded. But to understand that this power of the transformation of consciousness that's inherent and intent on freeing us from suffering, that has our highest good, well, that's partly what's being invoked by, she's the Divine Mother. And so when we relate to her and have experiences of her as the Divine Mother, in whatever form that might be, for a friend who is a Native American grandmother spirit, for somebody else, Shekinah, for somebody else, it's the Holy Spirit. It might be the Black Madonna. Oh, that's another whole series of archetypal images where the ancient goddess is coming through the Madonna form of Christianity to re-express her sovereignty, her presence. So when we start to understand that these are part of the images that are coming up spontaneously for people, because many times there's people having experiences in meditation and in dreams, visions of these archetypal images and coming up because of Kundalini awakening. They go, what is that? I would never, for me, here I'm a young man, I'm having experiences of a black goddess called Kali. I'm a white Protestant guy who grew up on Long Island. Kali? No, I did not know Kali. I came to know Kali. I came to know her as my own self. But it was understanding, and what helped inform that understanding was part of my being informed by, later on, helped give it a deeper meaning, Jungian work, and being able to delve into it and say, oh, this is that living presence I've been experiencing. It helped expand and even broaden my experience of that on an intellectual level. On a heart level, it was still the boundlessness of her loving, compassion, powerful presence. But it certainly helped the mind.
So just delving into this a bit more, are these archetypal spirits, energies, deities, are they aspects of our collective unconscious, or are they something separate?
Well, the reason I'm chuckling is because the mind is the one that creates the separation. So for Shakti, if you want to sort of look at it through the lens of the infinite, there is no other. There is no separate. The collective unconscious is me, is my consciousness, is all embraced by consciousness itself. So the separations can create conundrums for the mind that don't exist in reality, because the reality is there is no separation. There's not a thing, there's not like a reservoir. There's not like, oh, there's a great lake that we call the collective unconscious. And then there's the Mediterranean Sea, we'll call that individual kind of. No. That's the mind creating these things because it helps it hold it. But that's not the nature of them. The nature is oneness. Inflections of oneness, wearing different faces of the one. And they can be horrible faces. They can be terrifying faces. You know, the ordinary mind wants to believe, oh, the divine is only this one goodness. But the Eastern traditions certainly, and really many mystics in the West as well, see that, oh, when you go into that state, everything is there. The divine has created everything as an expression of itself. And beyond forms, there's a unitive experience. But when it starts to create forms, it creates all forms. All forms are her form. No form left out. The form might be ghastly, right? But what's the essence? What's the consciousness? What's the energy that took that form? We see that in physics. All kinds of forms. Some are useful, some are horrible. But the essential nature of every form is pure energy, formless.
So from a tantric perspective, and I've seen this myself, you can say Shiva Om. So I am Shiva. Right? So you can
Absolutely.
And integrate. And sometimes I wonder whether the Kundalini journey is for us to integrate these energies, so we depict them, and then we bring them into our own kind of aspect, and we go through work.
Who's the we that's going to pick them?
Sorry?
Who is the we that's going to pick them?
Okay. Well, let's just say that they whether it's maybe they're aspects of us already, maybe they're already there around us, but there's a calling. Somehow there's a connection between the person having the experience and the image that comes to them. Now, how that image comes to them, I don't know, and it can be cross-cultural, but there must be a reason. And as you integrate yourself through the journey, are we integrating those energies into our own consciousness?
Right. The reason I was asking that is because the limited eye awareness, that structure, that says, oh, then I'll be able to choose. It's like, oh, I'll go in the hero's journey, I'll come back, I'll have a wide palette, and I'll choose this or I'll choose that, and I'll see what I can paint in the world. But a funny thing happened to that little one on its way on the hero's journey, and it's recalled in the myth from the Hindu tradition of the salt doll. The salt doll goes to explore the nature of the ocean, and what happens? Well, it dissolves in the ocean. It disappears. So what its intent was to begin with, got it into the ocean. That was good. And then it came to know oneness, unity, all. It became one with all that is. So the hero's journey return, and it connects to what you're saying, is, well, then this instrument, it's not going, I'm choosing. It's saying, oh, the infinite, that power of revelation will continue to summon what that grace bestowing power wants to come through in this moment, in this time, in this interaction, what forms will the love, the compassion, the wisdom take in this moment? I don't have to have a mind trying to monitor and manipulate or figure that out or change it. You're in the stream, the current in the ocean. It's like the Gulf Stream. It's this tremendous current that's one with the ocean. It's a current in the ocean, and then it's one with the ocean. You become such a current, so that what's coming through isn't driven by a limited mind trying to say, "Oh, what should I choose, or what could I do, or what's the intent there?" No, you're in flow. It's a flow state. So flow state has importance in this, because in flow state, you're in the movement of that energy. You're not carrying it in the same way that the ordinary ego mind endeavoring does things.
In that case, situation, what is left of you?
Well, everything and nothing. That's what every person is. It's only because we're identified with being an Alan or a Samir or a Lawrence that we think we're just this one little stream coursing through with one little thread of reality. You got to know that you're the infinite and the finite. But now the finite, it exists only in service of the one. That's the difference. Before we know that, before we know our unity, we're still being driven by the ordinary impulses to make up for all the lacks and wants and needs and everything that make up the ordinary vehicle of mind and body. But when we've added to it the infinitude of wisdom, of knowing, of being, the truth of who we are, and seeing everyone as that, then this vehicle, it needs so little. It needs a little food, needs a little water, needs some warmth. So we see what the vehicle needs, but we're not solely identified with that. We see what it is to be skillful in the world. We can talk in a way that is completely understandable by all conventional beings for the most part. Some I have a hard time getting through to, but it's the natural it's the natural fullness of being. It's Jung saying the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. In all your fullness. Your fullness encompasses your infinite nature and your finite nature. Well, that's symbolically represented in the Kundalini system, right? The lowest chakra, the earth chakra, in the most contracted realm, the earth realm element, is still Shiva, Shakti, and Jungian there. Every aspect, every chakra has them in union in one form or another. It means the divine, in its fullness, in its unity, pervades all levels of reality. Can be known all levels across reality. Can be lived through all levels of reality.
I'm gonna try and formulate a question from everything you've been saying, because seems to be a pattern to what you're saying, which is, who is the person asking the question? And there's a finite mind that creates separation, but there's a boundless infinite that doesn't see anything as separation. Now, that is a very simple and sometimes very useful framework, but we live everyday lives, and many people going through the awakening process have heard about this. They've even experienced non-dual. I've experienced this. But you still have to get into the granular everyday of life. And from that perspective, we can always understand, and we're given a gift that there is this boundless joy. We still have to get through the everyday. And also, we work individually and collectively. So we work with people, we have family members who are not going through an awakening process in the same way that we are. And that creates a schism between what we've experienced and what they're experiencing every day. So whereas life's purpose might be to achieve this kind of boundless love and energy, but currently in 2024, for most people that come to our community, it seems that that's not necessarily where they're at the moment. They might understand intellectually that there's this boundless space and they've experienced it. But there's also a sense of the challenges that come along with the release of this psycho-spiritual energy that brings out trauma, right, in different ways. And what I have begun to hear, and it's a collective hearing from different people, is that they struggle with that. That's where they're at. They're struggling. They understand they might have had 1 day or a week or 2 months of peak experiences, and then they're having a year or 2 or 3 or 4 very challenging experiences. And I think in that space, hearing about the boundless love doesn't really necessarily help them. So as we try to meet them where they are at and understand where they're at, what can we do? When I say we individually and collectively, what can they do to really not get back to that place, or just find a balance in the journey?
Right. Oh yeah. Right. Well, and that's been my work for almost 50 years. And it's important for people to know, because they lose sight of the goal. Pain erases the sense of where is this really going? And so even when we're dealing with that, we have to hold that larger context, and a support community and others helps to hold the larger context. But it's also in the moment. That's why, like in the book Awakening Kundalini, The Path to Radical Freedom that I wrote, that Tammy Simon, the publisher of Sounds True, asked me to write, was to help give that, we need an integrative set of practices that help us to transform what's going on, that help support, if things are going through my body, how do I best support my body dealing with the pain, the trauma, the release, the things that have to be doing to get free of that? How do I support my mind in being able to do that? But supporting it also in the larger context of the goal of that is very different from the goal of, say, traditional Western psychology. Which was to make a person more adapted to a socially determined environment and happy to function within that. That is not the psychology of Kundalini. So we don't want to adopt the wrong goal based on the wrong paradigm that just impedes and limits us. So even while we may make use of therapeutic techniques that come from other paradigms because they're good for clearing the mind, they may have the wrong perception of who you are in your totality. But to be able to do work that looks at internal family systems can be very beneficial. Doing all kinds of somatic healing and therapy work. I did a lot of work in neurofeedback and biofeedback, helping people learn self-regulation skills literally on a neuronal level. To help be able to do changes to what's going on with the amygdala, what's going on with the stress response, what was born of past traumas, how do we decondition the brain and the body from these things. So we need to have skillful means, and there are many out there, but make sure we're using them in support of the paradigm that we're looking at that is so expanded and all-inclusive, even if the paradigm that first generated them wasn't. I was asked to give a grand rounds at a psychiatric hospital up in Massachusetts because they had a couple of people who were claiming to have Kundalini experiences, and the psychiatrist said, to us, this is just religious delusion and psychosis. But we'd like to try and understand it. We heard that, because I was on the faculty of a medical school for 24 years and I have credentials, they were willing to listen. They weren't willing to listen to the patients, but they were willing to listen to me to help explain how they could better relate to the patient, and what could be done to help support them, because psychotic experience is not integrative, and that's not something what we're trying to engender. But there are healthy ways to help a person through that, and there are ways that denigrates their very self. And we don't want to do the denigration. We want to say, oh, this is great. You have these experiences. Now, how do we integrate that? Oh, you need to step that aside and come back to, oh, what do I do in the morning when I get up? How do I make my bed? How do I take care of my, environment? What do I do for work? These are going to be grounding functions within this context that will enable you over time to be able to inhabit and integrate those greater spaces and expanses of consciousness.
I mean, I've heard some good things about internal family systems. So just on itself, are there other new systems that you come across that you think are facilitating people and helping them go through this process, apart from IFS?
Right. Well, I think a Jungian, there are many Jungian therapists who have some understanding of Kundalini and understanding of the archetypal nature of what's coming up. Self-regulation skills. So the Ashtanga Yoga, which was really developed, the Eightfold Yoga that Patanjali wrote about, the first two limbs that have to do with the yamas and the niyamas and asanas are self-regulation. Self-regulation is the foundation. If this system is out of control, it's like you got a car careening down the highway, bouncing off the rails and everything. The first thing you have to do is get it under control. Bring it, slow it down, get it to stop, fix what's going on. But self-regulation skills. So the yamas and the niyamas, they're an integrative self-regulation skill set. They could be looked at as an advanced form of cognitive behavioral psychology that all has to do with grounding and integrating a person just by adhering to the yamas and the niyamas. Neurofeedback and biofeedback takes technology and says, oh, we can really refine that. You can start to change the circuitry in your brain that was inadvertently conditioned by trauma and family or external trauma, and start to change the neuronal networks through neurofeedback, a non-invasive, non-medication, but a allopathic and recognized treatment for dealing with things like PTSD, like depression, like ADHD. So dysregulation in the body and the brain can often be dealt with more and more successfully with biofeedback and neurofeedback, because they teach you how to operate the system better.
Just to clarify, yamas and niyamas are ethics and morals that are documented in the Patanjali's 8 limbs.
Yeah.
And also, when you mentioned biofeedback and neurofeedback, I know a little bit about it. Could you just expand on what it is and how it works?
Right. Well, interesting with biofeedback. So the board certified in biofeedback, and I did a lot of trainings and trained physicians and things in it. And it's self-regulation skill training. Biofeedback and neurofeedback grew out of the study of yogis, advanced yogis and meditators back in the 50s that were doing things that Western medicine said were impossible. They were changing their heart rate, they were changing their respiration rate, they were changing skin conductance, they were changing temperature on one side of the hand versus the other. These are all driven by what's known as in psychophysiology as the autonomic nervous system. Autonomic means automatic. It's on autopilot, non-volitional. Yet here's these yogis doing this. They're changing it. Well, they're not aliens. They have the same human body as us. So there must be something innate that we can learn. So they said they must be figuring out the signal in some way. And so bringing technology, the West brings technology and says, oh, what if we put a sensor on your hand? And we pick up the conductivity, because skin conductance is a measure of stress response, and it has to do with the amount of sweat in your hands. The eccrine sweat glands are unique in that they respond to stress. So they will sweat. Even if it's cold, you can get sweat because you're stressed. That increases conductivity, decreases resistance. Well, you can train a person in relaxation skills and see that their skin conductance goes down because they're less stressed. Then you can train them, you can stress them, and they can train to master that. You can stress them more, train them. They do this with Olympic athletes. Most Olympic athletes are doing biofeedback training for peak performance. But everyday life is a performance, and we're being driven around by all these unconscious reactivity in the brain and the body, and biofeedback and neurofeedback are ways of being able to do that. They take some signal from our biophysiology, feed it back through technology, a computer screen, an app. You learn to change that, and in so doing, you're changing your whole physiology and your psychology. And so there's heart rate variability training. That's a very good one. I wrote an article on that related to meditation as well. Meditation training has been shown to have the same kinds of effects that the biofeedback does. Though biofeedback for many is easier to learn because it's very straightforward, it's very concrete. It gives you clear feedback. Learning is enhanced by clarity of feedback. So the biofeedback, whether it's EEG biofeedback, which is known as neurofeedback, or other forms of biofeedback, have very clear feedback, so you can really learn how to change what's underlying that reactivity that's changing my heart rate, that's changing my breath rate, that's changing my skin conductance. Oh, I can learn how to really calm that down and see that I did it, because suddenly it's on the screen. Oh, my physiology is now evening out. So it's very rewarding for people.
So it sounds like these techniques can possibly also induce an awakening experience as well. So they can.
Oh yeah. They can help. There was one neurofeedback practitioner out in California years ago. He got a Zen master from a local Zendo and said, "Let me show you this." And he did it on the Zen master, and the Zen master went, "Wow, I think I could cut 10 years off of the Zen training by using neurofeedback and biofeedback to help individuals." So there you were marrying a new technology with an ancient tradition, because they had the same goal. In a state of profound self-regulation, our natural self, our natural innate nature becomes more accessible because it's not clouded by all the reactivity of mind and body. That was what yoga was all aimed at.
Alan, do you have anything?
Well, to slightly change this conversation, I found myself a number of times during the conversation. This is a Jungian thing, really thinking about the shadow, and I was also found myself thinking about the world's problems, and that so much of the world's problems is done because people project their shadow onto another. It's us versus them. It's there, and that I think we can see in the world so many problems being created by that, and also in the Kundalini process. We face to process our own trauma, our own social conditioning, and our own shadow. And so I wonder if you could talk a bit about shadow work. Maybe this perhaps not fair to really ask you to do this, but maybe even with yourself, how you managed to work on your own shadow, perhaps, because we all have one.
Right. Yeah, and that began with my Jungian work. Certainly, as my training as a psychologist early on. It was back in the day when you actually had to go through the process. Nowadays, not all clinicians get trained that way. But you went through therapy, and deep therapy, and Jungian therapy. And so Jung talked about shadow work was what he called the apprentice piece. That was the starting place. The masterpiece was to deal with integration of Anima and Animus. That's another topic. Much more closely related to Kundalini, actually. But shadow work that's everybody's work, because these are the split off pieces, positive and negative. Shadow isn't always just the things we wished we'd avoid. There are also the things that we lost track of because we weren't rewarded for the talents we had, and a parent who said, no, you can never play the guitar, or men don't play guitars, or whatever it might have been. So dealing with shadow is just part of that. Where's our reactivity? Where's our anger? Where's our irritability? Jung said, you want to start looking at shadow? Look at anybody who just sort of, you meet them and you get irritated or anger. That's your shadow. That person is carrying a wonderful message for you. To look at that quality, because the quality in that person that you're feeling irritated and annoyed or angry with is yours. It's amplified by they may carry it as well, but your irritability is your responsibility, and your trigger is your shadow. So that's really how it was looked at in these various ways, that sort of combing through the inner recesses. Now, when you have the companion of the power of consciousness helping to illuminate not just the ego mind, whose conditioning is to avoid self-reflection on that level. Most of the time, deep shadow work has to be done with somebody else because the ego mind just avoids it, doesn't want to see it. We have to hear from our spouse. We have to hear from people who are close. We have to hear from our enemies. We have to hear from our therapist. We have to hear from anybody who's going to help carry that message into our consciousness. Says, you're not getting this. That's shadow work, and it certainly happens in the course of awakening and unfolding. In the Kundalini Stavaha, this great hymn to the Kundalini that I start the Awakening Kundalini book with an invocation of born from that. But in that, and in the piece I wrote, it talks about, that's a fundamental part of Kundalini, was to look at your negative sides, your dark sides, because they're inhibiting. And your identification and protection of them is further inhibiting both them being cleared and you being able to be the conduit of your sublime highest self, this power of loving compassion that knows no bounds. The shadow is going to be in the way.
Thanks. You just mentioned before you started to work the shadow about integrating the anima or animus.
Right.
Do you want to say a few words about that?
Well, it's another thing that Jung talked about, but it comes up spontaneously in spiritual unfolding. In consciousness, consciousness isn't like, I'm just a man, I'm just a woman. It's both and neither. And in the course of that, we start to be able to experience in different ways through archetypal forms, masculine divinities, feminine divinities, unification with those. The whole process of doing puja or worship in the Eastern traditions as ritual culminates in identification with the deity. It doesn't stay separate. If it stays separate, then you haven't realized the power of it. You haven't become one with it. And so you may invoke Shiva and see that as that archetypal power of sort of detached observation, all accepting, all embracing, but detached. Very different than the feminine Shakti, that's also that power of consciousness, but is also delighting in the creation and the becoming of all forms. You're both and you're neither. That's all going to be part of that integration of what seems to be polar opposites, the feminine and the masculine, but have their unity in consciousness itself.
Thanks. Samir?
Thinking through just the whole conversation, it sounds like your whole life you've been researching and developing maps that help people go through the journey. You found things that helped you, and you found things that helped other people. And I guess as we kind of come to the conclusion, what are the do you want to summarize? First of all, what do you think are the main things that can help yourself, or the main things that help people, and how do you feel about the future? What's the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years? We spoke about collective awakening. Do you feel that there's going to be a shift or any kind of change happening?
Right. Well, summarize. You're asking somebody who's written books to summarize. I'd say, well, Soul's Journey is a good summary. So is Awakening Kundalini. But what I found is loving, compassionate, selfless mentors. This is not a do-it-yourself project. This is not something, you can't walk a path alone. If you're by yourself, sure, you keep walking, but it's so much enhanced by a loving, compassionate, selfless, please, selfless. Somebody who's only there to serve. They don't have an agenda. They're not trying to make you a swami, an acolyte, a disciple, a student. They're just trying to enter and understand where you are and see if they have any insight that could help you navigate your inner landscape, walk your unique journey, and to not be all of a sudden shocked and fearful and because they get caught in their own stuff. So that kind of wise, compassionate, kind mentor, really important. Being open to seeing and guided by the divine within. If we really all the time seek to turn towards that, not just turn towards the mind, not just turn to an authority, not just turn to some fundamentalist tradition, No, turn to the one who knows, who's already within you, and wants to illumine your way forward. That's what meditation is about. How to come to rest and sit. At first, it feels like you're sitting with somebody else, something else, some other power, some other consciousness, because our identity with the ordinary, limited self is so strong. But that boundary is going to start to dissolve. And you start hearing more and more is, oh, what's that voice of wisdom? And then, oh, well, I just can't trust that voice of wisdom, but I have some outside trusted voices too that I can see, I can check, because I don't want to get caught in my own delusion. So that's another reason why having somebody else to be a part of that practice is so important, because the maze of the mind can keep you bound for lifetimes, wandering alone, caught in your own delusion.
So I've got a follow-up question to that. You talk about the mentor. Can the mentor be a peer community?
I imagine that's part of it. It depends. Collectives tend to have, not as a collective, evolved as far as certain individuals. And so when, for instance, when Buddha talked about he gave voice to something that was already well described and understood, the three jewels. He was talking about a wise mentor teacher, a set of practices that will empower and help unfold, and a community of like-minded seekers. That all three were fundamental supports to a person successfully navigating this ocean of, samsara, as he would call it. So it wasn't just one. He looked at it as a stool that you can stand on. You can't stand on one leg. You can't have a stool with only two legs and have it easily stood on. But three you can stand on, and it's very stable. So that was his way of formulating that, and I think it's a very helpful way. And Jung talked about groups, and he says, groups tend to reflect lower levels of consciousness than maybe the highest consciousness of the individuals in the group. We see that in culture. The leaders may not represent the highest consciousness in a culture. They may represent the basest, but it has a strong power of energy, of instinct and emotion. We see that in politics. So we have to have a way of evaluating what's the collective level of consciousness of a group, because there's a long history of humanity's groups not serving the highest consciousness.
But there's also a history of individuals not serving the higher consciousness.
Oh, absolutely,
as well.
Absolutely. That's why I was saying three. The three was required, because the group is also necessary to examine the individual. Too many people, they get caught up in and then the collective around the teacher fails to hold the teacher responsible. So I don't see it as an either or. I see it as like that's necessary. Or in the moment in a group, who's carrying the greatest voice of wisdom? Often that's what you see. And it's not that it's static. That person always has to be the sole carrier of the voice of wisdom. Then somebody else comes up with an insight. Now Shakti's coming through them. How do we honor that? So I can see that all of that is possible, but we want to have that reflection that it's not just because it's a group, it's automatically better than the individual.
Thanks a lot. And about the future, what do you think is going to happen in the next 5, 15, 20 years?
Well, I'm hopeful that this, the power of evolution of consciousness that we might call Kundalini, or we might call any number of things, consciousness itself, that this is a time for that expansion. And in part, just as we were talking earlier on, how trauma creates awakening, we're in a situation of collective trauma, collective threat. We're facing, on a global level, existential threats in terms of environment, in terms of deluded leaders, that is provoking awakefulness in many people. And so I think that's part of how it's being met on this sort of universal consciousness level is, the collective of humanity needs to wake up, both to deal with the karmas it created as being an unconscious collective that polluted the hell out of the earth, and has created that existential crisis, as well as how we have created these, oligarchs, fascists, despots that have also evolved out of our human consciousness. We need the higher consciousness that can transform those, that can free the consciousness from those very bound and destructive forces. And that, to me, is this power of awakened consciousness operating through individuals, right? It awakens in you, then you have to operate. The Now You Hero's journey is, how do you support that? How do you support all the structures of society and culture that are going to be aligned with that?
That kind of leads us on to another podcast that we plan to do with you in a few weeks' time, where we want to discuss maybe the more political and social and global implications of Kundalini and spiritual awakening.
Yeah, beautiful.
So that's part 2. Is that right, Alan?
Makes sense to me. And so we're back to the hero's journey, but this is the collective hero's journey.
Yeah, yeah.
But we'll also, in the notes to the video, have a link to the site, a link to the books. Do you want to mention it just now, what the site's called, and the books again, and anything else you want to mention back as well?
Sure. The easiest is to go to the site that's called thesoulsjourney.com. And that has access through that to many free resources, to the Anamkara meditation website and the YouTube channel that has over 170 free videos for people related to Kundalini meditation, etc. All the books are listed and with links to make them accessible on the Soul's Journey website. Podcasts that I've done with other interviewers from around the world, all as free resources available on the Soul's Journey website.
And you also do Kundalini counseling. It's for a fee, but you are a counselor, and if people want to come to you, they can come to you on your website. Is that correct? Yeah.
People can arrange that, and I try and work with a sliding fee, and so people come to me for one-time sessions, multiple sessions. That's up to them, but I try to make myself as accessible as possible.
Okay, that's great. So listen, we look forward to seeing you again, I think, in a week or two, and then doing part 2, which will be a great conversation. We haven't really spoken with anyone about the bigger implications. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Lawrence.
Yeah, great talking with you all.